Yet another film we could say only the Coen brothers to capture something set in a vintage time period that is done so well, historically real, historically serious, epically cynical and hilarious all at the same time, with one of the greatest soundtracks ever to exist for any movie. John Turturro, George Clooney, Tim Blake Nelson, 2000's Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's actually hard to review a movie like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Because I love it so much. Like The Big Lebowski, seemingly just before it, it's a huge part of my collection. I watch it, I rewatch it, I have it memorized, I make memes about it. You just gotta believe it is a fabulous soundtrack, a fabulous movie. Anytime you can take something like the Odyssey from Homer and adapt it and make it plausible and make it work, that's just mind-blowing. As a student of history and a lover of those ancient stories, this is what great fiction does. This is what so many of the shows today are not doing. Star Wars was a retelling of an epic historical story about fathers and sons and the redemption of the father by the son. Star Trek is more of an open-ended story of the human spirit of exploration and discovery, with all of these infinite details and possibilities in there. Most of modern entertainment has become about your feelings, your personal identity, your whatever, people that achieve nothing, accomplish nothing, do nothing, but I talk about that all the time. The Odyssey is this classic, epic sort of root metaphor of Western civilization. The Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, or Ennead, depending on how you pronounce it. These things are epically just part of how Western civilization forms. The Trojan War is this turning point in the ancient world where the world begins to move from being city-states that are somewhat in trade with one another in contact, to beginning to behave like a multinational state or alliances, crossing over the sea to go and rescue Helen, nominally, to make this epic battle between these great collections of city-states and their spheres of power. And so much happens. It's so pivotal. You can't say enough about those men returning from the Trojan War, bringing with them this new, wider, broader perspective on different places and the potential for the future. And that, some of those guys that were hidden in the belly of the Trojan horse, those Greeks end up at the 7 hills of Rome and end up founding the city of Rome. The Roman Empire, and therefore most of Western civilization, is born in the belly of the Trojan horse. And what an incredible idea to take the Odyssey, the return of Odysseus or Ulysses of Ithaca to Greece over this period of 20 years from the epic story and history, and to work it into a story set in the Jim Crow Depression era South, complete with sirens, the washerwomen, the cyclops, the Bible salesman, with the bad guys that are out there, the Ku Klux Klan, the Grand Wizard. You literally had a wizard in the story if you paid attention, tying in all of these elements of the actual Odyssey, but instead of veterans returning from a war, which is interesting, they're convicts escaped off the penal farm, following the adventures of these 3 men as they wind through this very classic Americana sort of world. It's amazing how wildly popular this movie was. And it's one of the many that I would say, I'm so glad they made it when they did. I seriously doubt you could even make this movie in the era of woke because of the depictions of the Ku Klux Klan. Even though they are both played for dramatic and serious antagonism and for comedic value because the ones we meet are kind of idiots, nevertheless, I think it would be a very hard sell to get anyone to do that. If you made this movie today, there'd be a 15-minute monologue with Ally McBeal looking at the screen and telling you how racist everything is in America today. And it's just like this, still today. They destroy any possibility of a nuanced use. But Oh Brother, Where Art Thou captures this perfectly. Those men are a real entity in that time and place, and they are a threat, and there is drama when they attempt to lynch Tommy Johnson. There's real threat involved, and yet there's the comedic value of the buffoonery of the gubernatorial candidate, who's the reform candidate, but is a grand wizard, and his friend, the dwarf. Sorry, Peter Dinklage. The Klan member dwarf with his little white sheets, as if nobody knows who's under those white sheets. Only the Coen brothers could finesse that to be so perfect. Perfectly ironic, perfectly humorous, perfectly threatening. This awesome antagonist in the story out of this thing that has sort of become a cookie cutter cliche bad guy in bygone years. But overall, the Odyssey is a redemption arc. Of course, we get a different ending, the same way we get a different beginning. They're not returning from the war, they're escaped off the Pinot farm. And unlike Odysseus or Ulysses in the actual story, they do not get home, make a plan, and slaughter everybody that's going after his wife in his absence. But there's one guy, and this is sort of the whole way that they Christianized the story in this interesting way that obviously is not overtly religious. The Odyssey is overtly religious with all the appearances of the gods and goddesses, and that the humans are just mortals caught up in the conflict between them. And then there's obviously hubris. Odysseus has to come around to understand that he's not in control and not going to be, and his redemption arc within the pagan story of coming around to humility. And we get all of this in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But because it is the Jim Crow South, Depression era South in America, you got to couch this in Christian ideology or it just doesn't work. And this is what they do perfectly. Our Cyclops is not part of myth. He's a Bible salesman. Our sirens are referred to as that, but they're just washerwomen that are mysteriously vanished, and there's no real explanation given. There's some sort of temptress. But we get the whole redemption story of Ulysses Everett McGill, Odysseus, who rejects God, renounces the things of God. He mocks baptism, believes in his own strength and intellect. He is very much Odysseus, to the place where he prays before his impending death for forgiveness. In that moment, he turns to the Lord. Of course, for him, he abandons it as soon as he's free, as humans are wont to do. But it's a beautiful part of this story. First, he comes back to faith in the sense that at least there is a God and he's above me. I'm not in control like I thought I was. And then ultimately at the end, humility. Humility of his men, like Odysseus is in the story. There's a brief, for all the epic poetry of that classical era being about war and clash, there's this little tidbit of personal touch where the men are like, look, we're not following you anymore. You're the king, you're our general, you've been in charge, but we've spent 20 years away from home, and every plan of yours has come to nothing. And he gives this little speech, as he does in the movie. Look, hang on with me, stick with me, just one more time. Give me one more shot. We're so close, we're gonna make it. I know I've been a bad leader. I know that I've been arrogant. I know that it didn't work out. And it's a beautiful personal insight couched in this epic classical poem. And we get this in the movie. So in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? We get the whole sort of redemption arc from the personal redemption arc, though we don't get the war, though we don't get the slaughter at the end in good Greek fashion, but we get that important sort of substance, the personal touch, the thing that we as modern man, to use that term, we as modern man could glean from that poem that is still every bit as relevant as it ever was. His arrogance, coming around to humility, acknowledging the gods, asking his men to stick with him, and then it pans out in the end that everything does work out like it's supposed to, but you only get there with humility and the support of others and your God. So there's a million other things I could say about this movie. I just love it. It's quotable. The soundtrack is wonderful. Get the soundtrack, listen to it until your ears bleed. Tell me what you think below. Oh, brother, where art thou?